Welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church.
How does your faith kind of play into it, or does it play into it?
What can be done about it? When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you chose to either view this on YouTube or listen to it on iTunes or Spotify. We always want to know how we are doing with the Thrive Podcast. You can reach me at fredjeffsmith@cox.net, fredjeffsmith@cox.net. Just drop me a note. Let us know how we're doing, up, down, sideways. We appreciate hearing from you. I'm very grateful today to have as my guest Mr. Scottie Hunter, who is a news reporter for WAFB Channel 9 here in Baton Rouge. Mr. Hunter, thank you for taking the time to be a part of the Thrive Podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I learned just before we came on the air that you're from Montgomery, Alabama. How did Scottie Hunter get from Montgomery, Alabama to Baton Rouge, Louisiana?
Well, I mean, the thing about a journalist, I feel like you kind of have to be nomadic these days. I mean, obviously, you can't really start and stay in the same place that you begin. I think it was just the job. I mean, I've lived in Dothan, Alabama. I've lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana before coming here. So it's just kind of, you got to be open to moving around.
So, living in Lake Charles, living in Baton Rouge, aside from the fact that one is a little bit larger than the other, did you get the sense that Louisiana is different depending upon which region of the state that you're in, or did you think that we're basically the same?
Yeah, I think so. It's similar, but then it's different. I think the hospitality is the same. A lot of places that you go in Louisiana, I mean, people that you meet, they kind of treat you like family. They treat you like they've been knowing you forever. And that's after one meeting or so. I think that where it's different, though, is kind of in the celebrations. I know Lake Charles is a lot more into the festivals, and they'll have, a festival every weekend, whereas when I got to Baton Rouge, it wasn't really a festival kind of place. I mean, you have your festivals, but, it's a little bit more.
They tend to be more in the outlying areas and in New Orleans. I have a friend who was just lamenting the fact that every other weekend there's a festival down in New Orleans of one sort or another. Why do you think that festival mania has not taken hold in Baton Rouge? Because you've been here for a while now. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think it's just, in Lake Charles, there are a lot of casinos and, there's a lot of manufacturing, things like that. So maybe it's just people kind of like that community aspect more. Whereas in Baton Rouge, I feel like there's a little bit more to do as far as entertainment-wise. So people kind of have more options and they don't really have to rely on that. You know what I mean? I think, obviously I grew up in a rural area, so I understand.
You consider Montgomery rural?
Well, I grew up a little bit north of Montgomery.
Okay.
So, you say the closest, biggest city.
Right.
I grew up in Autauga County.
Okay.
So it was very rural.
Okay.
And so I definitely understand, cows and chickens and things like that. My grandfather raised those. So,
Okay.
Yeah, when you have that more rural area, you tend to kind of come together closer as a community, I feel, and so people kind of gather around those events.
We're getting close to Mardi Gras, and of course that's New Orleans is world famous for Mardi Gras. But I was telling you before we started recording, I spent some time in Mobile, Alabama, eons ago. A lot of people don't know that Mobile has a pretty solid Mardi Gras celebration as well. Is it just South Alabama, or does Mardi Gras creep up into Central and Northern Alabama as well?
Yeah, well, it's mostly South Alabama, believe it or not. It's kind of centered just around Mobile from my experience. When I was in college at Alabama State University, I had a friend from Mobile, and she always likes to brag about that's where Mardi Gras started. I don't want to say that too loud here.
Right, that's okay.
Because people get protective about Mardi Gras. But Mobile has a big one. They do the moon pie drop, I believe it is, and so, but it's mostly around that area. Growing up, I never really did Mardi Gras. I knew about it. Obviously, heard stories about it, and knew that New Orleans was the place to go for that. But in Montgomery, it just didn't really reach.
There are celebrations also in Biloxi. I guess there's one in Gulfport, but it doesn't seem to leave the coast. You don't find celebrations in northern Mississippi, just as you don't find celebrations really in northern Louisiana. Shreveport may have a party or two, but it's certainly not the same thing as what you have in New Orleans. As a news reporter, when you're asked to cover something like Mardi Gras, as opposed to covering a more current event or political event, what's your response to that? Do you enjoy doing coverage of stories like that as opposed to political things or crime stories, things like that?
Yeah. Well, I prefer, just from the shift that I work night side. So normally I'm in from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night. So, I prefer like the crime, the hard news. That's really what we kind of have to bring to the table in that role. But I can do lighthearted stuff. I mean, it just depends on the day. I don't get to do as much of that. But matter of fact, I was coming in and I got a text asking me to do something lighthearted. And it's just a discussion,
Okay.
We kind of bat it back and forth and kind of decide what the needs are that day. If I'm by myself that night, then, certainly I won't do anything lighthearted. But, if there is another reporter there, I will kind of get that leeway. I mean, if I have my way, I prefer to do hard news, crime, politics, investigative stories. I've gotten to do a little bit more of that recently. So I prefer doing that. I think those are the things that kind of help people understand what's going on around them, maybe answers questions, maybe shines light on something that people are interested in. I'm actually working on one for Monday out of Baker, and I don't want to give too much away about that one.
Sure.
Certainly, but it's kind of about protecting yourself against fraud. It was a case that is going on there, and I think it's something that people will be interested in.
You have a wonderful voice. I'm listening to it right now. It's a wonderful voice. And I'm sure you enjoy doing television. Do you ever think about doing radio?
Yeah, actually, I worked in radio before getting into television.
Okay.
When I was in college at ASU, I ended up kind of working my way over to the radio station. They have a jazz station. It's 90.7. It's WVAS are the call letters. And so when I was there, I started kind of part-time announcing in between classes. So I kind of worked that into kind of a part-time job, doing that on the weekends and maybe some days when I wasn't going to school. And then I actually ended up in the news department there after graduation. So I spent about 2 years in Montgomery working for news.
Do you, well, clearly your experience is in reporting, but a lot of radio today, aside from the music part, a lot of talk radio is about opinion, not necessarily reporting. Rush Limbaugh and people of that ilk. Do you prefer dealing with the more matter-of-fact issues of reporting, or do you have any interest in doing programming that allows you to share your opinion more than simply gathering facts?
Well, I won't say I'm completely closed off to more opinionated stuff. I believe just reporting, though, I mean, that's kind of what I've been trained to do. And it's just kind of a way of life now. It's just, you deal with the facts. You don't really form an opinion. You obviously, as a human, you have an opinion.
Right.
But, you kind of have to push that aside and just present the facts to people, let them make their decisions. Certainly in journalism, we deal with opinions because now that we have to do social media and you have Facebook and Twitter, everybody has something to say about, any story that we cover. I've had people that'll try to, say that I have an opinion based on, a story that I've covered, which, most of the time that's not the case. I try to just kind of present the facts out there and let people kind of decide what they want based on where it falls.
Do all news reporters do that? In your experience, I'm thinking now about the national networks. It seems to me that, and this is my opinion, I ain't a news reporter, I can say what I want to say. If you want to get a conservative viewpoint, you watch Fox. If you want to get a liberal viewpoint, you watch MSNBC. if you want to get something that's a little bit more middle of the road, in my opinion, you watch CNN. Now, all of these networks are supposed to be news reporting networks, but clearly there is a bent depending upon which network you watch. That's my belief. Do you think that that's an accurate belief, or do you have a different opinion about it?
Well, I think a lot of people kind of buy into that. I mean, I think that certainly when you look at the different networks, people kind of see that there is a slant in some cases. But that's why I like local journalism more, because you can kind of separate yourself from that, I feel like. And you can just focus on, your local community. You can focus on the issues that are going on right here, and you don't necessarily have to be a part of that larger, slant. I would say. I think people understand that, and people realize that. If you have situations that are big enough for networks to come down, a lot of times people will recognize that the local journalists do a better job at covering local issues without kind of turning it into a certain slant or leaning a certain way, versus sometimes the networks come in and people kind of get a sour taste in their mouths just based on that experience. I know I've been here for the flood. Obviously, there was not a lot of national attention on that in 2016, but there was a lot of national attention like on the Alton Sterling situation in 2016. And some people were okay with how that was covered. Some people didn't really like the way that was covered. And they kind of, made it known that, local media was more trustworthy in a lot of regards than, people that were coming into this community.
So when when Baton Rouge makes national news, such as Sterling, do national reporters rely on local networks in order to gather their information, or do they come in and gather their own information? Do they come in and call WAFB and say, can I talk with somebody? Can I pair up with a local reporter, because they don't know the city, they don't know the people to talk to. They have to gather their information some kind of way. What's the process by which that works?
Yeah, normally it's not so much a pair-up situation. They will call us, because if we do stories, it could be a great story, like a lighthearted story or a more serious story. They'll call our producers and they'll ask kind of what's going on with this. Can they get video? Can they get sound, that kind of thing? Any of the interviews that we've done, that's kind of how the affiliate relationship works. We share, we also get to get some content as well. So it's kind of a give and take. They will bring their reporters in, and they do have field producers and resources that we don't have that are already in place in certain areas, kind of from a regional perspective. And so they can get boots on the ground pretty quickly and get the interviews that they need. And a lot of times they can get interviews that we can't get, from a local standpoint, but then we can still get that on the back end. So it's kind of a good relationship to have.
WAFB is owned by who now?
Gray.
Okay. When I was a kid, I grew up here in Baton Rouge. It was a Guarantee. It was part of Guarantee Broadcasting. WBRZ was part of the Manship family. I don't think Manships own WBRZ anymore, or do they? I don't.
They do.
No, they do. Okay. They don't own the Advocate anymore. The Manships owned both the Advocate newspaper. In fact, it was the State Times, Morning Advocate, two newspapers, a morning edition and an evening edition, and they own WBRZ. Have you ever worked for a station that was more locally owned as opposed to more regionally owned? Because you're owned now by a regional or a national corporation as opposed to a local entity. And if so, what's the difference between working for local ownership versus working for a more national or larger group?
Yeah, I haven't had the experience of working for a more locally owned. I would imagine there are some differences, but most every station that I've worked for has been owned by, a larger corporation. Yeah, I've worked for Raycom. I've worked for Gray before. So
when you all recruit reporters in, you all can move reporters within any one of the areas where you own stations. Is that how people move from one area to another? If they own a station in Los Angeles, and they want to move this person to Baton Rouge. I'm just speaking hypothetically. It just happens because you guys are that large. Is that the way that works?
Right. Well, it's easier. It's kind of like a network of stations, so it's easier to kind of move from one to one within the company. I came from KPLC in Lake Charles before coming here, and that's our sister station. So it's easier to kind of, go along
Do you
that
get to
path.
do you make a request, or do they simply assign you to a new place? Is it a
you can
mutually
request.
agreed upon thing?
It's kind of a mutual agreement. I mean, you can look at a place that you want to go, and it's easier to kind of apply internally and go that route. I mean, obviously tell your current boss and the the person that you want to work for, kind of what your plans are, and you do the interview like anything else, but it's just a little bit easier to do that. Certainly, you can go outside the company as well, but it just kind of depends on kind of where you are in your contract.
There are 4 local news broadcasts now. There's you guys, there's WBRZ, there's WVLA, and whatever the Fox 44 call letters are.
Yeah. Well, they're kind of one and the same. So,
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, technically it's 3, but.
You guys are consistently ranked number 1 in this area. Why do you think that is? Especially when I was a kid, there were just 2 stations, WFB, BRZ, and for a long time, WBRZ was the number 1. Well, it wasn't but 2, but they were the predominant network. But for an equally long time now, it's probably been 15, 16 years, WAFB has consistently been the number 1 local network. What is it that WAFB is doing that allows you all to consistently be number 1, in your opinion?
I just think that it's, I think people can trust the people that are there. Not saying that they can't trust people at another network or another station, but I think that people kind of buy into a certain group, and you kind of like to see certain people bring you the news. I mean, I hear from people a lot that say, I trust you, and that's the biggest compliment you can get as a journalist. And when they trust you, they kind of buy into it. They tell their families about it. News is a kind of a generational thing. So if grandmother watches Channel 9, her children are going to watch Channel 9, their children are going to watch Channel 9, and people kind of grow up seeing that.
Right.
It's the same way back at home in Montgomery for me. I grew up watching WSFA, and that was what my grandparents watched, my parents watched, and that was what I watched. And you kind of teeter and watch the other one every now and again, but it just doesn't feel like home, So I think that it largely has to do with just kind of what you learned growing up.
Does your connection with CBS have anything to do with the strength of your local news broadcast? And I'm asking that question because you may or may not know, I'm old. WBRZ started off as being an affiliate of NBC. There was no ABC in Baton Rouge. When ABC finally came into Baton Rouge, at some point, maybe about 10 years in, ABC was the number 1 national network. WBRZ was the number 1 local news broadcast. And someone made the decision that the number 1 news broadcast, local news broadcast, needed to be affiliated with the number 1 national broadcast. And so they left NBC and went to ABC. And Channel 2 all of a sudden became an ABC affiliate instead of an NBC affiliate, and 33 became the NBC affiliate. Does it matter which national broadcast group that you were with? Does that help in your local ratings numbers?
I don't know that it does, because I think people kind of separate the two. Largely, I think that you have an audience that likes CBS, and then you have an audience that just loves WAFB, regardless of who it's affiliated with. I think that now it means a little bit less than it used to. I think that affiliate, whoever you were affiliated with, carried a little bit more weight, a while ago than it does now, because I mean now, if you have a CNN video or you have something that CNN covers, just about everybody is connected to CNN. So, I mean, you can kind of get the same information wherever you go. So
I think WBRZ's thing was people are watching Love Boat, and at 10 o'clock, they're not going to change from the channel where Love Boat is on to the local news.
Right.
So we need to be on the same channel with Love Boat and Fantasy Island. And if you don't know any of those television programs, I am extremely old.
Okay.
And so you're talking about CNN, but I'm talking really about local news. You know, I watch MSNBC almost all day. I can tell when people have messed with my TV because it's on CNN. I keep it on MSNBC almost all day. But when I'm ready for the local news at 5 o'clock, I turn to you guys. I turn to W. I don't even think twice about turning to the other folk. I turn straight to you guys. And for me, it has nothing to do with the fact that you guys are a CBS affiliate. I just prefer the news coming from you guys. I can't sit here and even say it's a trust factor. I just think, if nothing else, I think you guys do a better job. It's just more professional. It's better done. And so I watch your broadcast. Do you think that people are making their decisions based upon what national affiliate you guys are connected to?
I don't think so. Well, it depends, because you have those people that are watching, like you mentioned, the shows on that channel. So if you're watching Young and the Restless, you're going to watch, you know, you're going to stay on CBS.
Yeah, but you guys have Young and the Restless.
Yeah. So if you do that, then, you know, you have that crowd that's going to lean that way.
Right.
But then you have that crowd that, you know, as you mentioned, that feel like, you know, I prefer one over the other. Some people may prefer, you know, that other station or any of the other two stations. And, you know, that's kind of what they watch. But 9 times out of 10, most of the time I hear people, unless they're lying to me, saying that they prefer WAFB.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which we like to hear.
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure you do. Because you are a reporter, you have to maintain a level of balance with regard to community activities. But you're a human being. You have a wife. You're planning a family here in this community for as long as you're here. What's your sense of where Baton Rouge is as a community? What are your feelings about as you go about doing your business? Do you get good feelings about Baton Rouge, or do you have concerns about Baton Rouge?
Like with anywhere, you know, I think that there are good things and, you know, not so good things. I mean, there are parts of Baton Rouge that I absolutely love, but then there are parts I think that could be better. You know, everybody kind of has a little bit of work to do regardless of kind of where you are. I think some people kind of get fatigued with a certain area, like if they're born and raised there. For instance, coming from Montgomery, there are people there that are like, oh, I hate Montgomery. I want to leave. I want to get out. And, you know, that wasn't our decision to just leave because of that. Obviously, it was career driven. But I think, you know, there are good things that I like about it. And I mean, for right now, it's a great place to live.
When you think about the economy in this city, I'm not talking national economy, I'm talking local economy. When you think about recreational opportunities, things for children to do you think that Baton Rouge is on pace with other cities of our general size, or do you think that we need to step up in certain areas?
I think that you could step up in certain areas, and not saying that there isn't work that's being done. Like, I'm really excited about the zoo. I've been covering that for a while, and like some of the things that they have planned there and that they're planning on bringing there, I think that's going to be fantastic for kids. And certainly, I mean, there are areas that are already kind of prospering, like the Knock Knock Children's Museum. I think that's great. But, you know, I don't have children right now, so I'm not really in the market for that. But yeah, I think that, I mean, they're doing a great job of kind of bringing some things here, attracting other, you know, ventures to kind of move to Baton Rouge. But again, you can always improve. You can always make it better. So I think just the more that we have people kind of working together to try to do that, the better.
What do you think about the relationship between business and government, and the relationship between business, government, and the local church? Do you think that the relationship between those entities is a solid one? Is a growth-inducing one? This is a church, and so at some point I got to ask you about church and what you perceive the role of the church to be in the overall growth and enhancement of the community. Do you think that the church is doing a good job where that's concerned? Are we playing our role as partners within the Baton Rouge community?
Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of churches all over Baton Rouge, depending on whatever denomination you are or whatever you're looking for kind of in a church home. I think that, wherever you go, you're going to see people, you're going to see the church playing a role in the community and doing good things. We happen to go to Healing Place, and, we normally will have a lot of activities throughout the year, whether it's, giving back to the community around Thanksgiving, around the holidays, or, at other parts of the year. I think that, we do a good job at doing that. And I think the church, plays a large and significant role in the community. But I think that maybe we need to have a conversation about kind of what people want to see from the church. I think that people need to be more vocal about that.
You're a relatively young man, late 20s, early 30s. That seems to be the hardest group to maintain within the church these days. I've been doing this now for 34 years, and the hardest group to reach right now, and perhaps it's always been that way, is those people in the 25 to 35 year old range. They're not brand loyal, and by that I mean the church that they grew up in is not necessarily the church that they want to attend now. If you were asked to speak to a local congregation about what they could do to retain their young adults as a young adult, what is it that you would say to them?
I think it's just about engagement. I think a lot of times people, the reason they don't go to the church that they used to go to or the one that they grew up in is just because a lot of times, there aren't as many activities or there aren't as many things to do. I mean, people in that age group, that age range, they need stimulation. I mean, we have social media, we have so many distractions that are out there that you've got to be able to get them in, keep them in, and keep them invested in what you have going on. I mean, a lot of times, the church will sometimes become stagnant because they aren't doing maybe as much as they could be doing in the community. And maybe they aren't listening to some of the younger voices. That's also, something that plays a role in that. Sometimes, that older group kind of gets, locked into this is how we do things. This is how we're going to do it.
Right.
And, that's not going to change. And so you kind of push that group out, and they kind of go and find somewhere else where they can feel, part of the conversation, and also, that there is more happening than just the norm.
Back in November, when Eddie Rispone was running for governor, the Secretary of State, Kyle Ardwin, appeared at 2 Rispone rallies that I'm aware of, which is contrary to his responsibilities as Secretary of State. I personally lodged a complaint with the State Ethics Board. I have yet to receive word from the Ethics Board whether or not they have taken this matter under consideration. I did receive something saying that they had received my complaint, but they have not said anything to me about how they were going to dispose of the matter. When it comes to issues like that, political issues, you're a news reporter. I respect the fact that you have to maintain objectivity and balance and evenness and what have you. But there is a process that you go through with regard to your reporting. And you did reports on the fact that Mr. Ardwin had appeared at these events for Mr. Rispone. Here we are. That was back in November. Here we are almost in February. In fact, by the time this is seen, it will be February. Does it trouble you that government moves so slow in response to these issues? I'm not asking you to take an opinion one way or the other, but again, regarding process, is it troublesome to you that you can file something and it might be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months before you get any kind of response about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a journalist, I mean, that's kind of the name of the game. It's always kind of waiting. I feel like you always have maybe like 9 things on the stove and you're just kind of like pulling the lid up here and saying, okay, I'm checking on this and, I'm checking on that. Government moves slow sometimes. And, as much as we like it to be quick and we like it to be, we do a report, the next day something happens, or we do a report and, there are consequences or there's an outcome. That just doesn't always happen. Sometimes we cover something and we just have to continue to keep checking and we have to continue to keep kind of plugging away at it. And that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. I mean. So
hypothetically speaking, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Mm-hmm. You reported on this several weeks ago. Do you go to your boss and say, I want to follow through with this, or I want to check and see where we are? I'm ready to do a report on an interim basis to update the community as to where we are, or do you have to wait until something actually happens before you are dispatched to report on this again?
It kind of depends. Sometimes if it's very noteworthy or if it's something that a lot of people are concerned about, we'll do kind of status updates or we'll do check-in reports. Mm-hmm. It just depends on the situation. Sometimes we wait until something bigger happens, or we wait until there is a next step in the process before we do that. Mm-hmm. Because again, we don't want to appear like we're just zeroing in on any one specific topic and just kind of beating it to death. We kind of want to give it time to breathe. We're not in a hurry to kind of put anything out there. We'll let the process play out. But we normally will have editorial meetings where we'll talk about, what's next, or, what's the update on this story, what's the follow-up here. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times stories don't die. I mean, they kind of keep going and keep going. I mean, the 2016 flood, that's something that we covered in the heat of the moment. But even now, all these years later, there are still stories that we're doing on that. We're still trying to walk through the duplication of benefits mess. I mean, it's ongoing. So, right. I mean, I don't know that there is necessarily a deadline when you come to stories like that.
North Baton Rouge versus South Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. That seems to be a prevalent issue in local news today. There are serious concerns that North Baton Rouge has not received the same amount of attention, has not received the same amount of business as South Baton Rouge, or even as downtown, kind of the dividing line. Everybody says the dividing line is Florida Boulevard these days. But if you've lived here long enough, Florida Boulevard wasn't always the dividing line. But we'll go with that. Mm-hmm. What is your assessment as to the improvements that are being proposed for North Baton Rouge? Do you think that that's going to get some traction? Do you think that those things will actually become a reality?
Mm-hmm. I certainly hope it does, because that's something I've been here now since 2016, and I've heard that, back and forth for a while in several different areas. Mm-hmm. About, North Baton Rouge versus other parts of the city. And I think that, it's certainly an area that's deserving of economic prosperity. certainly people want to see that area grow, and people are invested in that. But I think that you've got to kind of continue to fight it out. You've got to continue to bring fresh ideas to the table. I'm hoping that what they're proposing is going to go through and make some positive changes there and bring about some prosperity in that area. But it's just kind of, again, it's a waiting game. You got to see how it's going to shake out, how it's going to play out, and just hope for the best.
Well, it's interesting. The government has to be the primary motivator behind any kind of advancements that take place in North Baton Rouge. I don't think government has to incentivize businesses to invest in South Baton Rouge, but they do have to incentivize businesses to invest in North Baton Rouge. Do you have any opinions as to why that might be?
I think it could be a number of things. Certainly people want to point to crime. People want to point to, things like that. I mean, but crime happens everywhere. I'm not exactly sure why that would be the biggest factor in that fight. But you just got to figure out how to combat that.
Do you think race has anything to do with it? In that North Baton Rouge is predominantly African American, and South Baton Rouge is predominantly Anglo-American?
Well, I think you've got to get more strategic in what you bring there. People are obviously going to want different things versus, just depending on what you want to bring to that area.
Everybody wants a grocery store.
Well, yeah, everybody wants a grocery store.
Yeah.
So that's something that should be there. That's something that we should look at investing in. I mean, that's...
Everybody wants a park.
Yeah, that's a basic need. I mean, that's something that people want. That's things that they need.
So I just find it interesting that there's no problem putting 2 or 3 Albertsons in the same cluster in South Baton Rouge, but there's not an Albertsons anywhere in North Baton Rouge. And government has to incentivize Albertsons or any other private entity in order to invest in North Baton Rouge. It's a concern of mine. And to me, it's one of the things that keeps this community at odds with each other. We try to nice it up by saying that it's conservative versus progressive or Republican versus Democrat, when really, at its root, it's white versus black. And does news media have a role to play in pointing out the racial disparities that exist within this community?
I think we do, and to a certain extent, I think that we do that. I mean, we've covered stories on the economic divide that exists here, and we've done stories on some of the things that need to happen in North Baton Rouge. It's just you can't spend all of your time focused on one particular issue because there's always so much going on. We have to kind of cover it all. So I think that certainly there's room for more of that. And, I'm certainly open to doing more of that. But it just has to
That leads
itself.
me to a question. How much independence do you have as a reporter in choosing the stories that you report about? Are stories assigned to you, or do you have a say, even if it's not a universal say? Do you have a say in the stories that you cover?
Yeah, absolutely. Every day we come in and we pitch stories. We'll pitch ideas. It'll be, things that we heard about, or maybe something that somebody brought to our attention, and we'll kind of present that in a meeting format. And the room it's like a democracy. We kind of juggle it back and forth and see where it lands, and then we kind of go from there. So I'd say I have a great deal of independence in what I'm able to cover.
Okay.
Do I always get my way? No.
Yeah.
But that's life.
I understand.
So, you get to present it and then just kind of see if that's something that we're able to pursue.
Has there ever been an instance where you felt passionately about something that you presented that was rejected?
Yeah, there's been instances like that. I think, though, that sometimes it's not always a no. Sometimes it's a not right now because, sometimes I might want to cover something fun and it's like, okay, well, we just had this big, plane explosion, so you can't do that. Obviously you can't do something lighthearted over, something as serious as that. So there are some nights and some days where, you have to cover the big story of the day, whatever that may be, whether it's a big economic story or whether it's, a big, crime story. Those are have to covers. And sometimes, what you bring to the table may have to be pursued next week or next month or this weekend, perhaps.
With regard to issues that extend beyond Baton Rouge into the larger metropolitan area, things that are happening in Ascension or in Livingston Parish or in St. Francisville or Clinton, things of that sort. Do you all, shouldn't say you all because that makes you think I'm talking about WAFB, do news reporters feel like stories that have to do with outlying areas get the same level of importance, get the same level of airtime as stories that deal with the more urban areas that comprise Baton Rouge?
I feel like certainly we could do a better job of getting out to some of those outlying areas. I do get to go out to other areas, not quite as much as I'd like to, but I also feel like that's, again, it goes back to the shift that I work. Working nights, I feel like most of the time we are centered more closely to urban areas. We are centered more closely to Baton Rouge. Whereas, when you have people that are working a day shift, they can kind of get out to those areas more. Do I get to get out to areas? Certainly. Not quite as much as I'd like to at times, but I mean, it's something that certainly you can always improve on.
I've seen you anchor from time to time, substitute anchor either the 10 o'clock news or the weekend news. Do you like doing anchor work as opposed to doing field reporting, or is that something that you aspire to?
I do. Yeah, that was actually something that I wanted to do since I was younger in high school. That's certainly a long-term goal of mine, but I do like to still report. I do like to get out in the community, meet people, tell important stories. So I kind of like a mix of both. And a lot of times that's what our anchors do get to do. They do get to still report to an extent. So I would like to still kind of do both.
Like I said, you're a relatively young man, and you have served already in several places. Where does Baton Rouge rank in comparison with some of the other places that you have served? And is Baton Rouge a place where you think you would like to spend the rest of your career? Sylvia Weatherspoon has been at WBRZ her entire career. I remember her as a young woman, and now she's still doing the news there. She found her place. Donna Britt, and before your time, John Mahaffey. They were local icons of the news here, and you really got familiar with them. They were our local versions of Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley. People that you knew, Harry Reasoner, stuff like that. Is Baton Rouge a place that you feel like you could just plant your flag and be here, or do you have aspirations to experience other, perhaps even larger areas?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm closed off to going somewhere else. Certainly the opportunity is there from time to time. But I think that certainly Baton Rouge is pretty high up there. I have no immediate plans to go anywhere. I certainly like it here.
Did you hear that, WFB? He has no immediate plans to go anywhere else?
Yeah, not right now. But I think that has a lot to do with the people here. I mean, they just kind of, again, they make you feel like family. They kind of just suck you in, and it does feel like home. Baton Rouge feels a lot like Montgomery to me, just from a size standpoint.
It's funny you say that because, as I told you, I used to drive back and forth to Mobile. I always thought Mobile and Baton Rouge had a lot in common. Mobile is a little bit smaller than Baton Rouge, but I always had a Baton Rouge feel when I was in Mobile. You're saying Montgomery has that kind of feel. Yeah, Montgomery.
I'm telling you, there are roads that are here in Baton Rouge that I will drive down, and I swear I'm in Montgomery. It's the same kind of setup, the same structure. So it does feel like home. And, we're relatively close to home, so I could see myself being here long term.
Are your parents still alive?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just wondering if you had parents back home that you were going back to see it at holiday time?
I have in-laws there. Yeah, my wife's parents are in Montgomery and in Birmingham. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, Birmingham is a much larger city. Much larger city. Although I liked Birmingham. All of the places that you've been have been in the South. Is that correct?
Right.
You've never been East Coast or West Coast or things like that.
No.
Is that something that interests you?
I don't know. It's one of those things that's kind of like, would I? But, Louisiana is one of those places that I never thought I'd be. So it just depends on kind of what happens. A lot of that has to do with my wife as well. I mean, she, we'll have conversations regularly about, do you want to stay here? Do you want to go somewhere else? I mean, 5 years down the road or so. So it just depends, kind of what we decide and what life throws at us.
You were at Alabama State. That means that you were a part of SWAC, Southwestern Athletic Conference. Did you play ball by any chance? Or
I didn't, no.
Okay. Everybody's hyped up about LSU and the national championship and the SEC and what have you. What's your attitudes about black college football or black college athletics, not necessarily limiting it to football? Where do you see historically black college and university athletics moving in the near future?
Well, I think they could get a lot better in the near future. I think certainly there's a lot of attention on football, but I went to college and I knew people that were on the tennis team,
Right.
and people that were on the bowling team.
Right.
And, I mean, there's so many diverse things at an HBCU.
Right.
That certainly it could get better. I think we have to kind of buy into it a little bit more, though, like we buy into the LSUs, the Alabamas
Right.
of the world.
Right.
I love those schools; they're great schools. But you see people that are more invested in those universities, whether they went there or not. And so I wonder, why can't we be that invested in, an Alabama State, a Southern? So I mean, certainly they're great schools and they're worthy of just as much praise.
They are, and I couldn't agree with you more. And hopefully, that will that will come about. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming by and sharing with us. I really wish that we could have talked a little bit more about politics, but I understand that we can't do it. Maybe on the back end of some of these things, we can have you back and we can talk about them then.
All right.
But thank you for taking the time to share with us
so much.
today.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again next time.